Commander Richard Hayes sat alone on his ship called Starfire. He watched space through a big window. His face showed many years of fighting in wars across the galaxy. He was known as the most dangerous human alive, but that was years ago. Now, he was just trying to be a good father. Richard looked at the small shuttle leaving his ship. His daughter Olivia was on that shuttle. She was 19 years old and heading to university. Richard felt worried, as he always did when Olivia went anywhere alone. "Dad, I'm getting on the shuttle now," Olivia said through the communication device. "School starts tomorrow and I can't be late." "I understand, Liv, just be careful, okay?" Richard said. He felt his chest tighten as he watched the shuttle. "Dad, seriously, New Harvard is the safest campus in the Alliance. What could possibly happen?" Olivia said with a small laugh. Richard smiled at their family joke. Those were the words his wife Sarah used to say before trouble happened. Sarah had died 15 years ago. "Love you, kid," he said. "Love you too, old man," Olivia replied, before ending the call. Richard watched the small shuttle go toward the wormhole that would take Olivia to the university planet. He planned to read some reports and maybe sleep, but something felt wrong. He stayed at the window long after the shuttle disappeared. 6 hours later, his emergency communication device made a noise. It was Admiral Patricia Wright, his old boss and one of the few people who knew where he was. "Commander Hayes," she said, "we have a problem." Richard felt cold even before she continued. "Olivia's shuttle never arrived at New Harvard. We know. It was taken by a Krek ship at the 4th junction." "Richard, they left a message. They know who she is and who you are." The room went quiet. Then all the lights on the Starfire dimmed as the ship sensed Richard's anger and fear. "They made a mistake, Admiral," he said in a very calm voice as he stood up. "They should have killed me instead." Richard went to his private room and opened a locked cabinet. Inside was his old combat suit, weapons and medals from the war. He hadn't touched these things in 7 years. He took out the combat suit and began putting it on. The Kreks were a reptile-like alien species. They had fought humans in a terrible war 10 years ago. Richard had led the final battle that defeated them at Proxima Centauri. Many Kreks still hated him for that victory. As Richard prepared his weapons, Admiral Wright appeared on his screen again. "The Kreks group that took Olivia is led by someone calling himself the Adjudicator. They want prisoners from the war released, plus weapon plans and maps to human territories," she said. "I don't care what they want," Richard replied. "Where is my daughter?" A map appeared showing a far area of space marked in red. "The Void Expanse," Wright explained. "It's beyond Alliance space. Their base is somewhere in this region, but it's full of dangerous space anomalies and black holes. No fleet can safely go there without exact coordinates." Richard studied the map, already planning routes in his mind. "I don't need a fleet." "Richard," Wright said quietly, "you've been inactive for 7 years. The galaxy has changed. New powers, new technologies, and new ways to die," Richard finished. "Give me access to my old resources and contacts. I'll handle the rest." Wright looked concerned. "The Alliance cannot officially approve a rescue mission that might start another war with the Kreks." "My daughter has been missing for 26 hours, Richard said, his voice frightening in its quietness. "Everyone knows what the Kreks do to prisoners after 72 hours, so you can either help me or stay out of my way." Wright was silent for a moment. Then she nodded. "Your old security clearances have been reactivated for 7 days. A clerical error, of course." "Thank you, Patricia," Richard said. "Richard, whatever you're planning." "Don't worry," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm not going to start a war." As the communication ended, Wright whispered to herself, "No, you're going to finish one." Richard set course for the edge of Alliance space. While the ship moved through hyperspace, he began making calls to old friends and colleagues who owed him favors. First, he called Kyle, an information broker. "Kyle, it's Hayes. I'm calling in that favor from Europa." "Hayes?" Kyle sounded shocked. "Thought you were dead." "Not yet. I need information on Krek's revolutionary movements, specifically a leader called the Adjudicator, and I need it fast." "This about your girl?" Kyle asked. Richard's jaw tightened. Yes. Give me an hour. Next, Richard called Alice, a weapons specialist. Alice, it's Richard Hayes. The woman on the screen wore work clothes covered in grease. Her eyes widened. Commander? I thought you were... Retired, I was. Things changed. How fast can you have the old Spectre suit operational? Alice whistled. That prototype hasn't been used in years. But for you? Give me 12 hours. You have 8, Richard replied. As the Starfire traveled through space, Richard made more calls. Former teammates, intelligence agents, arms dealers, and even some reformed pirates, all people who owed their lives to Richard Hayes. One by one, they answered his call. The Starfire's engines hummed as it accelerated toward the void expanse. In the pilot's seat, Richard Hayes checked his weapons. One last time. His face showed no emotion, but his eyes burned with determination. The galaxy was about to remember why Commander Richard Hayes had once been called the most dangerous human alive, and the Kreks were about to learn why taking his daughter was the last mistake they would ever make. Richard's ship arrived at the edge of the void expanse. This was a dangerous area of space with many black holes and strange gravity fields. Most ships avoided this place. Richard looked at the star map showing where the Kreks might be hiding. Computer, scan for any ships or stations in this sector, Richard said. The ship's computer made a soft humming noise as it worked. Scan complete, detecting one small trading station called Omega Point. Also detecting weak energy signals from an old mining facility in the Scylla Nebula. Richard nodded. Set course for Omega Point. We need information before we go deeper into the void. As the Starfire approached Omega Point, Richard changed into simple clothes that wouldn't show he was a former military commander. He needed to blend in. This station was known for illegal trading and people who didn't ask questions. The Starfire docked at Omega Point. Before leaving his ship, Richard activated its security systems and slipped a small pistol into his jacket. The station was not a friendly place. Inside Omega Point, the air smelled bad. The lights flickered and the walls were dirty. People from many alien species walked through the narrow hallways. Some looked at Richard with suspicious eyes, but most ignored him. Richard walked to a bar called the Broken Orbit. Kyle had told him that a Krex named Vornik often came here. This Vornik sold weapons to the revolutionary group that had taken Olivia. The bar was dark and noisy. Richard sat in a corner and ordered a drink. He didn't touch it but pretended to sip while watching the door. After 2 hours, a Krex entered the bar. The reptile-like alien had green scales and yellow eyes. He wore expensive clothes and jewelry. This had to be Vornik. Richard watched as Vornik met with 2 humans at a table. They talked in low voices and exchanged small packages. When the meeting ended, the humans left, and Vornik remained alone, drinking something that smoked in his glass. Richard walked over and sat down across from Vornik. The Krex looked up in surprise. "Who are you?" Vornik asked, his voice hissing between sharp teeth. "Someone looking for information," Richard said quietly. "About a human girl recently taken by your people." Vornik's eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you're talking about. Leave before I call security." Richard leaned forward. "I think you do know. The girl was taken by the group led by the Adjudicator. The same group you sell weapons to." Vornik started to stand up, but Richard grabbed his arm. "I'm not finished." "You're making a mistake," Vornik hissed. "Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are," Richard said. "But I don't think you know who I am." Richard slid a small device across the table. It projected a hologram showing his military ID. Vornik's yellow eyes widened in fear. "Hayes," he whispered. "Commander Hayes. Now you understand," Richard said, turning off the device. "Tell me where they took my daughter." Vornik looked around nervously. "I can't. They would kill me." "I will kill you if you don't talk," Richard said calmly. "The difference is, they're not here right now." Vornik was quiet for a long moment. His scaled hands shook slightly. "There is an old mining facility in the Scylla Nebula. The Grendel Corporation abandoned it years ago. The Adjudicators group uses it now as their base. How many Kreks are there? Richard asked. Maybe 30 warriors. Plus security drones and automated defense systems, Vornik said. You can't attack it alone, not even you. Richard stood up. Thank you for your help. As he turned to leave, Vornik called after him. Wait. There's something else you should know. Richard stopped. The Adjudicator? He's not just any revolutionary, Vornik said quietly. He's General Varex. Richard turned back slowly. General Varex died at the Battle of Proxima. I saw his ship burn. He survived, barely. His body was rebuilt with machine parts, Vornik explained. He spent years planning his revenge against you. Why take my daughter? Richard asked. To make you suffer before he kills you, Vornik said. Varex lost everything in the war. Now he wants you to feel the same pain. Richard nodded slowly, processing this new information. General Varex had been his greatest enemy during the war. A brilliant but cruel Krex commander who had killed thousands of humans. How long do I have? Richard asked. The ritual of revenge takes 3 days to prepare, Vornik said. That was their tradition before the war. If Varex follows the old ways, you have until tomorrow night. Richard left the bar without another word. His mind was racing as he walked back to his ship. Varex was alive, and he had Olivia. Back on the Starfire, Richard studied the mining facility's schematics that Kyle had sent him. The facility was built into a large asteroid with multiple levels and security checkpoints. Breaking in would not be easy. Richard opened a storage compartment and took out the Spectre suit that Alice had sent. It was a black combat suit with advanced technology. It could make him nearly invisible and enhance his strength. The neural connectors would link directly to his brain, giving him faster reactions. As Richard prepared to put on the suit, his communication device beeped. It was Admiral Wright. Richard, I have news, she said. Our intelligence suggests they're keeping Olivia alive as bait. They want you to come. I know, Richard replied. It's Varex. Wright's face showed shock. General Varex? That's impossible. He survived Proxima. He's been rebuilt, part machine now, Richard explained. This is personal for him. Richard, you need to wait for backup, Wright urged. I can have a special forces team ready in 24 hours. Olivia doesn't have 24 hours, Richard said. I'm going in alone. Wright looked worried. What's your plan? Richard checked his weapons. Get in, get Olivia, get out. And if Varex gets in my way, he paused. Then I'll finish what I started at Proxima. Good luck, Commander, Wright said. Softly, as the communication ended, Richard began putting on the Spectre suit, each piece connected smoothly to his body. When the helmet closed over his head, the display lit up, showing him enhanced views of his surroundings. Computer, set course for the Scylla Nebula, Richard commanded. Maximum stealth approach. The Starfire's engines hummed as the ship moved deeper into the void expanse, toward the nebula where Olivia was being held. In the pilot's seat, Richard Hayes, the most dangerous human in the galaxy, prepared for war. The Starfire moved silently through the Scylla Nebula. Richard sat in the pilot's seat, wearing the Spectre suit with the helmet open. The nebula was beautiful but dangerous. Clouds of colorful gas swirled outside the ship. Hidden in these clouds were strong radiation zones and gravity traps that could pull ships apart. Computer, scan for the mining facility, Richard ordered. The computer worked for a few moments. Facility detected. Distance, 8,000 kilometers. Warning, multiple defense systems active around the facility. Richard studied the scan results on his screen. The mining facility was built into a large asteroid. Around it floated smaller defense platforms with weapons. Patrol ships moved in regular patterns between the platforms. Find me a blind spot in their sensor coverage, Richard said. The computer calculated for several minutes. Possible approach vector found. Using the radiation cloud in Sector 7 as cover, we can approach within 1,000 kilometers without detection. Set that course. Richard instructed. Silent running. The Starfire changed direction, moving slowly into a thick purple cloud of gas. The radiation levels rose, but the ship's shields protected it. Through the cloud, Richard could now see the mining facility. It was bigger than he expected, with lights showing on multiple levels. Richard closed his helmet, completing the Spectre. Suit systems. The suit connected to his nervous system, enhancing his strength, speed, and senses. The display inside his helmet showed tactical information about his surroundings. Computer, I'm going in with the stealth pod. Keep the Starfire hidden but ready for quick extraction. Richard entered the small pod attached to the side of his ship. It was just big enough for one person. The pod detached from the Starfire and moved silently toward the asteroid. Its stealth systems made it nearly invisible to sensors. The pod approached a small maintenance airlock on the side of the facility. This area had fewer sensors according to the scans. Richard attached the pod to the airlock and used a special device to bypass the security system. The airlock opened, and Richard slipped inside. He was now in a narrow maintenance tunnel. His suit's camouflage system adapted to the surroundings, making him hard to see. The helmet display showed him a map of the facility. Now to find Olivia, Richard whispered to himself. He moved through the maintenance tunnels, avoiding the main corridors where Krek's guards might be patrolling. The Spectre suit's sensors detected life forms nearby and displayed them as red dots on his map. Richard came to a junction where he needed to leave the maintenance tunnels and enter a main corridor. He waited, watching through a small vent as two Krek's guards walked past. They wore heavy armor and carried energy rifles. The human will come soon, one guard said to the other. The general says it is certain. Let him come, the other replied. He cannot fight all of us. When they were gone, Richard slipped into the corridor. According to the facility schematics, the central command area was 3 levels down. That was the most likely place for them to keep Olivia. Richard found an elevator shaft but didn't use the elevator itself. Instead, he opened a service hatch and climbed down the shaft using the suit's enhanced strength. He passed each level silently, listening for any signs of where Olivia might be. At the 3rd level down, Richard heard voices coming from a large room. He carefully opened a vent and looked inside. It was a command center with many computer screens and control panels. Several Kreks were working at the stations, and there, in the center of the room, was General Varex. Richard barely recognized his old enemy. Half of Varex's body was now machine. His green scales blended with metal parts. One of his eyes glowed with a red light instead of the natural yellow. He stood taller than the other Kreks, his mechanical parts making him more imposing. Is everything ready? Varex asked one of the other Kreks. Yes, General. The trap is set. When Hayes arrives, the sensors will detect him, and we will seal all exits. Varex made a sound that might have been a laugh. Good. And the girl? Still in the holding cell. She has not spoken since yesterday. Richard felt anger burning inside. But he controlled it. Getting emotional would not help Olivia. He needed to find the holding cells. According to the map, the holding cells were on the level below. Richard continued down the elevator shaft. When he reached the next level, he found a quiet spot to exit the shaft and entered another corridor. This level was darker and felt colder. The walls were bare metal with doors spaced along the corridor. Each door had a small window and an electronic lock. Richard moved silently from door to door, looking through each window. Most cells were empty. Then, in the last cell, he saw her. Olivia sat on a small bench against the wall. She looked tired but unharmed. Her hands were bound with energy cuffs, but she was alert, studying her surroundings with the same analytical gaze that Richard recognized from himself. Richard checked for guards. There were 2 at the end of the hall, but they were not looking his way. He used a small device to disable the electronic lock on Olivia's cell. The door slid open silently. Olivia looked up, startled, but saw nothing because of Richard's camouflage. He stepped into the cell and closed the door before deactivating the camouflage. Dad? Olivia whispered in disbelief as Richard appeared. It's me, Richard said, removing the energy cuffs with another device. Are you hurt? No, Olivia said, rubbing her wrists. But Dad, it's a trap. They're expecting you. I know, Richard replied, checking the corridor through the window. But they didn't expect me to get this far without being detected. Can you walk? Olivia nodded. They want to use me to hurt you. The leader, he's General Varix. I saw him, Richard said. We can talk later. Right now we need to move. Just as Richard was about to open the door again, an alarm began to sound throughout the facility. Red lights flashed in the corridor. Intruder detected in holding cell block, a voice announced over the speakers. All units respond. Richard's mind raced. Their escape route was about to be cut off. Change of plans, he said, opening a compartment in his suit and taking out a small device. This is a personal shield generator. It will protect you for a short time. He attached it to Olivia's wrist and activated it. A faint blue glow surrounded her. Listen carefully, Richard said, speaking quickly. We're going to fight our way to the hangar on level 2. There should be transport ships there. You take one and escape while I hold them off. I'm not leaving you, Olivia protested. You have to, Richard insisted. Get back to the Starfire. The computer will recognize you and take you to safety. Before Olivia could argue more, the door slid open. 4 Krex guards stood in the corridor, weapons aimed at them. Surrender, Hayes, one of them ordered. Richard pushed Olivia behind him and raised his hands slowly. I surrender, he said calmly. Then, in one swift movement, he activated the suit's combat mode. The world seemed to slow down as the suit enhanced his reactions. Richard moved faster than the guards could track, disarming the first 2 before they could fire. The third guard got off a shot that glanced off Richard's armor. Richard struck back with enhanced strength, sending the guard flying against the wall. The fourth guard backed away, calling for reinforcements on his communicator before Richard could reach him. Come on, Richard called to Olivia, grabbing a fallen guard's weapon and handing it to her. Stay close to me. Together, they ran, down the corridor toward the emergency stairs, the sound of approaching guards echoing from all directions. Richard and Olivia ran through the corridors of the mining facility. The alarm kept blaring. Red lights flashed everywhere. Richard led the way, holding the weapon he had taken from the guard. Olivia followed close behind him. The stairs are this way, Richard said, pointing to a door at the end of the hallway. They reached the door and Richard pushed it open. Inside was a metal staircase going up and down. They started climbing up toward the hangar level. Dad, they knew you were coming, Olivia said as they climbed. They've been talking about you for days. They called you the most dangerous human in the galaxy. Richard kept moving without looking back. Right now, I'm just trying to get you out of here. They reached the level where the hangar should be. Richard carefully opened the door and looked out. The corridor was empty for now, but he could hear footsteps approaching. Stay behind me, Richard told Olivia. The hangar should be just ahead. They moved quickly down the corridor. At the end was a large door marked with symbols in the Krex language. Richard recognized the word for ships. Just as they reached the door, 6 Krex guards appeared from a side passage. They raised their weapons. Stop right there, Hayes, one of them shouted. Richard pushed Olivia behind him and fired his weapon. The energy blast hit the ceiling, causing debris to fall between them and the guards. It wouldn't stop the guards for long, but it gave them a few seconds. Richard pressed the control panel and the hangar door slid open. Inside was a large room with 5 small ships. They were Krex scout vessels built for speed. We need to get to one of those ships, Richard said. Can you fly one? I think so, Olivia said. The controls should be similar to the simulators at school. They ran toward the nearest ship. Richard provided cover, firing at the door as the first guard started to break through. The personal shield around Olivia glowed as a few shots came. Close to her, when they reached the ship, Richard worked on opening the hatch while Olivia kept watch. The hatch opened with a hiss, revealing the cockpit inside. Get in and start the engines, Richard told Olivia. I'll hold them off until you're ready to launch. Olivia climbed into the cockpit and started pressing buttons. The ship's engines began to hum. Richard took position behind some cargo containers, firing at the guards who were now streaming into the hangar. His Spectre suit was working at full power, helping him aim with incredible accuracy. "Dad!" Olivia called from the ship. "The engines are online, but the hangar door is closed. We need to open it." Richard looked across the hangar. The large outer door was indeed sealed shut. The control panel was on the far wall, near where the guards were entering. "Keep the ship ready," Richard shouted back. "I'll get the door." Using the suit's enhanced speed, Richard sprinted across the hangar, dodging energy blasts from the guards. He reached the control panel and slammed his fist into it. The hangar door slowly began to open, revealing the stars outside. As Richard turned to run back to the ship, he saw a tall figure enter the hangar. It was General Varex. The half-machine Krex leader stood watching him with his glowing red eye. "Hayes," Varex said, his voice partly mechanical. "Finally, we meet again." "Not for long," Richard replied, firing at Varex. The shot hit Varex in the chest but seemed to have little effect. The Krex general laughed, a strange sound mixed with electronic noise. "Your weapons cannot harm me," Varex said. "I have been rebuilt stronger than before." Richard knew he couldn't beat Varex in a direct fight, not now. His priority was getting Olivia to safety. "Dad, the ship is ready," Olivia called from across the hangar. Richard ran back toward the ship, firing behind him to slow down the pursuing guards. Varex walked calmly after him, not hurrying. Just as Richard reached the ship, an energy blast from Varex hit him in the back. The Spectre suit absorbed most of the impact, but Richard still fell to his knees in pain. "Dad!" Olivia screamed from the cockpit. "Go!" Richard shouted, struggling to his feet. "Take off now." "Not without you," Olivia insisted. Richard climbed into the ship, the hatch closing behind him. Olivia immediately fired the engines and the ship lifted off the hangar floor. Outside the cockpit window, they could see Varex standing in the center of the hangar watching them. He raised his arm, which transformed into a large weapon. "Hold on," Olivia yelled as she turned the ship toward the open hangar door. Varex fired his weapon. The blast hit the side of their ship, causing it to spin. Alarms sounded in the cockpit, but Olivia kept control. She aimed the ship straight at the hangar door and pushed the engines to full power. They shot out of the hangar into open space. Behind them, more blasts fired from the mining facility, but they were already moving too fast to be hit. "Set course for the Starfire," Richard said, checking the ship's systems. "It should be hiding in the radiation cloud." Olivia piloted the ship with surprising skill, weaving between asteroids and debris. The Krex mining facility grew smaller behind them. "I think we lost them," Olivia said after a few minutes. Just then, the ship's sensors beeped a warning. Richard checked the display and his face grew serious. "3 Krex fighters just launched from the facility," he said. "They're coming after us." Olivia pushed the engines harder. "How far to the Starfire?" 2 minutes at this speed," Richard answered. "But those fighters are faster than us. They'll catch up before we get there." Richard moved to the back of the cockpit where there was a small weapons control station. "Keep flying," he told Olivia. "I'll try to slow them down." The first Krex fighter appeared on their tail. Richard aimed the ship's rear weapons and fired. The shot missed but forced the Krex ship to change course. "Good shot, Dad," Olivia said. "Lucky shot," Richard corrected her. "These controls are different from what I'm used to." The second and third Krex fighters joined the first. They formed a pattern, making it harder for Richard to target any of them. Energy blasts from the Krex ship started hitting their shields. "Shield strength at 60%, Olivia reported. "We can't take much more of this." Richard kept firing, managing to hit one of the Krex ships. It spun away, damaged but not destroyed. "There," Olivia suddenly shouted. "I can see the Starfire." Through the cockpit window, they could see Richard's ship emerging from the purple radiation cloud. Its weapons were already active, firing at the approaching Krex fighters. "The Starfire's automatic defense systems are targeting the fighters," Richard said with relief. "Get us in close and the ship will protect us." Olivia guided their stolen Krex vessel toward the Starfire. The larger ship's weapons drove off the pursuing fighters, creating a safe path for them. As they approached the Starfire, its docking bay opened to receive them. Olivia carefully piloted the Krex ship into the bay, setting it down more gently than Richard expected. "Where did you learn to fly like that?" Richard asked, as the Starfire's docking bay closed behind them. Olivia smiled for the first time since her rescue. "I might have borrowed your simulator program a few times when you were away." Richard laughed, despite the danger they were still in. They were not safe yet. Varix would not give up so easily. Richard and Olivia stood in the control room of the Starfire. They had escaped the mining facility, but they were not safe yet. The ship's computer showed 3 Krex warships leaving the facility. They were coming after them. "They really want us badly," Olivia said, looking at the screen. Richard nodded. "Varix won't give up easily, not after all these years." "What happened between you two?" Olivia asked. The guards talked about some battle at a place called Proxima. Richard sat down in the pilot's seat and started pressing buttons. The Starfire's engines powered up to full strength. "It was the last big battle of the war," Richard explained as he worked. Varix was leading the Krex forces. They were trying to take over 3 human colony planets. I was in charge of defending them. "And you won," Olivia said. "Yes. But it was a hard victory. Many people died on both sides." Richard's face looked sad as he remembered. Varix's ship was hit badly. It fell into the star's atmosphere. Everyone thought he died there. "But he didn't," Olivia said. "No. Somehow he survived. And now he wants revenge." Richard looked at his daughter. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" Olivia shook her head. "No. They just locked me up and asked me questions about you, about where you live, what you do now." Before they could talk more, the ship's alarm sounded. The computer showed the Krex warships were getting closer. "We need to get out of here," Richard said. "But we can't use the wormhole junction. They'll follow us and we might lead them to other human planets." "What can we do?" Olivia asked. Richard thought for a moment. "We need to end this. Otherwise, Varix will keep coming after us." He looked at the map of the Scylla Nebula on the screen. "There's a way, but it's dangerous." He set a new course for the Starfire. The ship turned and headed deeper into the nebula. "Where are we going?" Olivia asked. "There's an unstable area in the center of the nebula," Richard explained. "A place where gravity is very strong and changing all the time. Ships usually stay far away from it." "So why are we going there?" "Because if we can get the Krex ships to follow us in, they might get caught in the gravity waves." Richard looked determined. "It's risky, but the Starfire is faster and more maneuverable than their warships." Olivia sat in the co-pilot seat. "What can I do to help?" "Watch the sensor readings," Richard said, pointing to a screen. "Tell me if any of the gravity waves change direction." As the Starfire flew deeper into the nebula, the view outside changed. The beautiful colors became darker and swirled faster. The ship started to shake slightly. "The Krex ships are still following," Olivia reported. "All 3 of them." Richard nodded. "Good. They're too focused on catching us to notice where we're going." Suddenly, the main communication screen lit up. General Varix's face appeared. His half-mechanical features looked angry. "Hayes," he said, his voice partly human and partly machine. "You cannot escape. Surrender now, and I will let your daughter live." "Like you let the people on the colony planets live?" Richard replied. "I don't think so, Varix. The war isn't over, Hayes," Varix growled. "Not while you and I still live." "You're right about one thing," Richard said. "This ends today." He cut off the communication and turned to Olivia. "Hold on tight. This is going to get rough." The Starfire entered the central region of the nebula. Here, the gases were thinner, but invisible forces pulled at the ship from all directions. Richard's hands moved quickly over the controls, keeping the ship on course. "Gravity wave approaching from the right," Olivia called out. Richard turned the ship sharply, avoiding the dangerous area. On the screen, they could see the Krex ships, following them. The first Krex ship wasn't quick enough to avoid the gravity wave. It was pulled sideways, spinning out of control. "One down," Richard said grimly. The remaining 2 Krex ships kept coming. They were being more careful now, watching how the Starfire moved and following the same path. "They're learning." Richard muttered. We need to go deeper. The Starfire pushed forward toward a dark area at the very center of the nebula. Here the gravity was so strong that even light seemed to bend around it. Dad, are we heading toward a black hole? Olivia asked, her voice tense. Not quite, Richard said. It's a gravity well. Similar, but not as strong. We can escape it if we're fast enough. The ship shook harder as they got closer to the gravity well. Warning lights flashed on the control panel. The Krek ships are still with us, Olivia reported, but they're having trouble keeping up. Richard checked the power levels. We'll make one pass around the gravity well. The Starfire can't handle it, but their bigger ships might not be able to make the turn. He pushed the engines to maximum power. The Starfire shot forward, then curved into a tight arc around the edge of the gravity well. The forces were intense. Olivia and Richard felt pressed into their seats as the ship fought against the pull of the gravity. Behind them, the Krek ships tried to follow the same path. The second ship came in too fast. It couldn't make the turn and was pulled toward the center of the gravity well. The ship broke apart under the strain, pieces scattering into the darkness. The third ship, Varex's command vessel, was more careful. It slowed down, trying to make a wider turn around the gravity well. He's going to make it, Olivia said with concern. Richard nodded. I knew he would. Varex was always a good pilot. He adjusted the Starfire's course. But now he has to follow us out of the nebula, and we're faster. As the Starfire completed its turn around the gravity well, Richard pushed the ship into a new direction, away from the nebula, toward open space. Setting course for Alliance territory, Richard said. Once we reach the border, Alliance ships can help us. The communication screen lit up again. Varex appeared, looking angrier than before. This isn't over, Hayes, he growled. I will find you again. No, Varex, Richard replied calmly. It is over. The war ended 10 years ago. It's time to let it go. For a moment, Varex seemed surprised by these words. Then his face hardened again. Never, he said. The screen went dark. On the sensor display, they watched as Varex's ship stopped, pursuing them and turned back toward the void expanse. He's leaving? Olivia asked, surprised. For now, Richard said. But he'll be back someday. And we'll be ready, Olivia said with determination. Richard smiled at his daughter. She had her mother's eyes, but his spirit. In the past few days, she had shown courage and quick thinking that made him proud. Yes, we will, he agreed. But first, let's go home. The Starfire flew toward Alliance space, carrying the most dangerous human in the galaxy and the daughter who had proven to be just as strong as her father.